Welcome to my next video. Don't forget to like and subscribe to follow more amazing content. John, a white police officer, was on his usual night shift when he spotted a car parked by the roadside without its signal lights on. He decided to approach for a check. As he walked over, he saw a black woman sitting in the car, looking calm but somewhat tired, with underlying suspicion and prejudice. John began the interaction with a stern tone, asking her to step out of the car and present her ID. Rachel, the black woman, was not just an ordinary person. She was a respected state prosecutor, just returning from a long and exhausting day at work. However, she knew that resisting the police at this moment would only cause more trouble. Rachel calmly handed over her ID and tried to maintain her composure, despite feeling insulted. John didn't thoroughly check her ID and quickly concluded that Rachel was acting suspiciously. He instructed her to turn around, place her hands on the car, and cuffed her, ignoring her explanations. Although Rachel felt unjustly treated, she tried to stay calm, hoping the ordeal would end soon. Rachel was taken to the police station in the dead of night. Inside, she was led to an interrogation room, where other officers looked at her with suspicion. John felt he had done his duty and felt no remorse. However, when Rachel's information was verified in the system, a shocking truth left everyone stunned. Rachel was not just an ordinary citizen. She was a state prosecutor, a person of power and reputation. John was shocked to learn Rachel's true identity. Fear slowly set in as he realized that the woman he had unfairly arrested and mistreated held a high position in society. The scrutinizing looks from his colleagues only added to the pressure on John. Rachel said little, simply demanding to be released immediately and informing them that her lawyer would be in contact with the police department. She left the station, leaving John in a state of anxiety and confusion. This was not just a personal mistake. It could be a serious legal and reputational error on his part. Rachel was not one to be easily intimidated. She decided she couldn't stay silent and needed to protect herself and others from police abuse of power. The next day, she contacted her lawyer and initiated a formal complaint against John and the police department. The story quickly spread through the media. News outlets and social media widely reported the incident, emphasizing that a state prosecutor had been unjustly detained solely due to her skin color. The public grew outraged over the police misconduct and demanded justice for Rachel. Rachel was not only a strong woman but also a symbol of resilience in the face of injustice. She decided to use her story to seek justice not only for herself but also for the many others who had been or are victims of discrimination and abuse of power. John couldn't have anticipated that the situation would become so serious. The media continued to report on the wrongful arrest, and his image became tied to abuse of power and racial discrimination. John began to feel pressure from all sides, colleagues, family, and himself. Every time he stepped out of his house, the curious and critical stares from neighbors and people around him made him feel like a criminal. Even his former friends gradually distanced themselves. At the police station, the atmosphere was more tense than ever. Some colleagues looked at him with reproach, while others quietly supported him, believing he was just doing his duty. John started to realize that his actions had not only affected himself but had also severely damaged the police department's reputation and the public's trust in the force. He felt powerless and uncertain about what to do to change the situation. Meanwhile, Rachel also faced criticism from a segment of the public. Some people believed she was exaggerating the issue and using her position to pressure the police. They felt she should forgive and move on to avoid causing further trouble. Rachel knew the path she had chosen wasn't easy. She had faced discrimination and injustice throughout her life, and now she was determined not to let this matter pass quietly. She wanted to protect the basic rights of all citizens, regardless of race or social status. For her, this wasn't just a personal matter but a responsibility to the community. Rachel was frequently harassed by negative comments on social media and even threats from police supporters. She understood that standing up to the system was not simple, but she didn't back down. Her close friends and colleagues continued to encourage and support her. giving her strength to keep fighting. Rachel decided to participate in public speaking events to explain why she couldn't simply let this go. She wanted people to understand the daily struggles faced by the Black community, and that her case was just one of countless examples of injustice. These talks attracted a lot of interest, and Rachel felt the growing support from the community. Under pressure from his superiors and the public, John was asked to meet with Rachel in person to apologize. The meeting took place at Rachel's attorney's office, with several witnesses present to ensure transparency. John entered the room with a tense demeanor. He knew he was in the wrong, but he had never had to face such serious consequences before. Rachel sat across from him, her expression calm and resolute rather than angry. John began with an apology, but Rachel interrupted him. She didn't want a hollow apology. She wanted him to understand what he had done and grasp the impact of his actions on her and the community. The meeting was tense but constructive, marking the first time John truly confronted his unconscious biases and began to consider change. Rachel shared her story with John, recounting instances of discrimination she faced solely because of her skin color. She spoke about the hardships she and her family endured, the times she was scorned and misjudged. John listened, and for the first time, he felt the injustice people like Rachel face. Rachel's words cut into John's pride, forcing him to reflect on his past actions and attitudes. After the meeting, John left with a heavy heart. He knew his apology wasn't enough to make up for what he had done, but he was determined to change. He wanted to do something to make amends and contribute to improving relations between the police and the community. The incident involving Rachel's arrest sparked an internal investigation at the police department. The department's leadership decided to review the entire workflow of the night shift team, from handling situations to interactions with citizens. The investigation focused not only on John but also on the entire police department system. Continuous interviews and interrogations took place, with officers questioned about how they handled situations and the protocols they were supposed to follow. Issues in procedures and training gaps gradually came to light. Many other officers were also criticized for not following procedures correctly or for showing disrespect toward citizens. John faced tough questions from leadership and investigators. He felt as if he were on trial, with every statement he made under intense scrutiny. He realized that his mistake was not just personal but also reflected shortcomings in the whole system. This made him even more remorseful and determined to change. Meanwhile, Rachel was also invited to participate in the investigation to share her perspective. She provided clear evidence of the unfair treatment she endured and emphasized the need for police system reform. She called for specific changes in police training and oversight to prevent similar incidents from occurring in the future. The internal investigation shook the entire department, forcing everyone to reassess their work methods and responsibilities. It also brought about a shift in awareness among many officers, helping them realize the importance of respecting all citizens and treating them fairly without discrimination. This incident caused a clear division within the police department. Some of John's colleagues supported Rachel, believing that changes in police practices were necessary, especially in how they handle people from vulnerable groups. They recognized that mistakes like John's were not isolated cases but reflected a deeper issue within the profession. On the other hand, others sided with John, feeling he was simply doing his duty and didn't deserve such harsh criticism. They felt that Rachel bringing the issue to the public had caused unnecessary trouble and damaged the police department's reputation. These colleagues argued that the media and public criticism was unfair and made other officers fearful of performing their duties. This division created a tense atmosphere within the police department. Heated debates occurred in the break room, and veiled criticisms were frequently exchanged. Those in favor of change tried to argue that this was an opportunity to revitalize the system, while the conservatives defended the old ways, believing the issue was overblown. John was caught between the opposing views, unsure of where to turn. He felt isolated, without support. He also realized that his actions had sparked this division, and he felt responsible. This isolation made John reflect even more on his actions and the changes he needed to make. Meanwhile, Rachel didn't stand idly by. She knew change couldn't come from just one side. She reached out to officers who supported her and organized discussion sessions to hear the opinions of other officers, trying to find solutions to improve relations between the police and the community. Rachel understood that unity was crucial for real change, and she didn't want to miss this opportunity. Rachel and her supporters put forward specific proposals for reform, including increased diversity and inclusion training, as well as stricter oversight of abuses of power. These efforts began to draw the attention of police department leadership, and some small changes were implemented to improve the situation. Rachel decided to share her story with the media. In a special interview, she talked about her upbringing, about the times she and her family were rejected simply because of their skin color, the instances of unfair treatment, and the feelings of hurt she had endured. She emphasized that this incident was not the first time she had faced discrimination, but this time, she decided not to stay silent. Rachel's story made a powerful impact on the public. People who had experienced similar circumstances saw themselves in her story and felt understood. Rachel became the voice of those who couldn't speak up, quickly becoming a symbol of resilience and courage. She wanted to convey the message that no one should have to endure injustice because of their skin color or social status. Meanwhile, John faced a different reality. He began to realize that it wasn't only Rachel who had experienced such injustices, but many others in the community as well. He listened to their stories through the media and the discussions he attended. This made him understand that what he once considered normal actually contained a lot of prejudice and unfairness. John started attending diversity and inclusion training sessions organized by the police department after the incident. He listened and learned from the instructors, colleagues, and even Rachel herself. He understood that change wasn't easy, but it was necessary. For John, this was an opportunity to correct his mistakes and become a better person, a better police officer. Rachel and John also had more private conversations after their first meeting. They discussed ways in which the system could change, what each individual could do to create a fairer environment. John began to understand more deeply what Rachel had gone through, gradually building an empathetic relationship with her. This was a significant step forward for both of them, as it showed that despite coming from opposite sides of an issue, they could find common ground to work together toward positive change. After Rachel's story spread widely, protests began erupting everywhere. People from neighboring cities joined in to support her and demand justice. These protests were not limited to Rachel's city but spread across the country, becoming a movement calling for changes in how police interact with the Black community. People carried banners with slogans like "Justice for Rachel" and "End Police Abuse." The protests were peaceful yet determined, demonstrating strong community support. Human rights activists and various nonprofit organizations voiced support for Rachel, demanding that the police department be held accountable and implement necessary reforms. Rachel received support not only from ordinary citizens but also from community leaders, politicians, and even celebrities. She was invited to many interviews and human rights forums, where she had the opportunity to share her story and spread her message of justice and courage. The encouragement and support from the community gave Rachel strength, helping her continue on the path she had chosen. Rachel used this opportunity to call for systemic reform. She proposed changes in police training, emphasizing the need for education on human rights and diversity. She wanted police officers to better understand the communities they serve, to ensure fair and respectful treatment. Rachel's proposals received support from many, and the police department began considering implementing these changes. Meanwhile, John did not stay on the sidelines. He felt responsible for helping correct the mistakes he had caused. He joined the protests, not as a police officer, but as a citizen who wanted to contribute to change. He also began participating in community programs to rebuild trust with those he had wronged. One day, at a large protest in the city square, John stepped onto the stage, holding the microphone. His voice trembled as he began apologizing to Rachel and the community. He admitted his mistakes, acknowledging that prejudice had influenced him and that he hadn't fulfilled his responsibilities as a police officer. John emphasized that he was trying to change and that he wanted to help improve relations between the police and the community. John's public apology was met with applause from the crowd. Though some remained skeptical, his sincerity moved many people. Rachel stood among the crowd, watching John with a contemplative look. She knew this was only the beginning, but it was an important step. She felt that true change was starting, not only from the community but also from within the system. The community support and protests put significant pressure on the police department and authorities. Police leadership had to commit to reforms and implement measures to increase transparency and accountability. Workshops and diversity and inclusion training were initiated for all officers, and John became one of the pioneers in leading these changes. Rachel continued her work with greater determination than ever. She was fighting not only for her rights but for those who lacked a voice. She knew that the road ahead would be long and challenging. But with the support of the community and allies like John, she believed that one day, justice and equality would truly become a reality. John's life changed completely after the incident. Every day, he woke up with a heavy heart, knowing he had to face the consequences of his actions. Criticisms from the community and colleagues still echoed. John felt immense pressure as he tried to make amends and start anew. At the police department, the atmosphere hadn't returned to normal. While some colleagues began to understand and sympathize with John, others kept their distance, and some even displayed contempt. Hints of criticism and judging glances made him feel like he was being scrutinized every day. He knew regaining their trust wouldn't be easy, but he didn't give up. Outside of work, John engaged in community activities where he could reconnect with people who had lost trust in him. He joined volunteer groups, assisted families in need, and participated in discussions on equality and social justice. At first, some people were reluctant to interact with him, but John persisted, showing sincerity in everything he did. One day, at a volunteer event at a daycare center, John met a young mother named Linda. She knew about his case and initially kept her distance. But when she saw John caring for and playing with the children, she began to change her perception of him. Linda decided to approach and ask why he was volunteering. John openly shared his journey of remorse and his desire to make amends. Linda listened and realized that he was genuinely trying to change. She chose to forgive him and even encouraged him to continue his volunteer work. Encouragement like Linda's gave John renewed motivation. He understood that change couldn't happen overnight, but, step by step, he could rebuild the community's trust. He continued to work hard, not only to atone but to prove he could become a better police officer and a better person. Rachel continued her work with determination, but she didn't avoid difficulties. The incident with John had turned her into a symbol of the fight against injustice. But this also meant she became a target for those unwilling to change. Threats and criticisms increased. Some accused her of tarnishing the police's image and causing division in society. One morning, when Rachel arrived at her office, she received an anonymous letter with death threats. Although this made her feel uneasy, Rachel chose not to be intimidated. Instead of succumbing to fear, she reported the incident to the police and carried on with her work. She knew she couldn't let threats hold her back. Rachel also received support from her colleagues and family, who stood by her and offered encouragement. Rachel decided to increase her presence in the community to spread her message of equality and justice. She organized workshops, inviting experts and citizens to discuss issues of racial discrimination and abuse of power. These workshops attracted a large audience, especially young people interested in learning more and contributing to societal change. At one of these workshops, Rachel met a group of high school students. They had heard her story and expressed admiration for her courage. A girl named Emily asked Rachel where she found the courage to face all these difficulties. Smiling, Rachel replied, "Courage isn't about being fearless. It's about feeling fear but continuing forward. I'm doing this not just for myself but for all of you, for our future." Her answer moved many and inspired them to stand up for justice. Rachel's relentless efforts, along with community support, began to yield results. The leadership at the police department accepted some reform proposals put forward by Rachel and social activists. Diversity and inclusion training became mandatory for all police officers, covering respectful treatment of all individuals, regardless of skin color, background, or social status. John was among the first to participate in these training sessions. He listened to stories from those who had suffered discrimination and abuse of power, and gradually, he gained a deeper understanding of his responsibilities, not just as a police officer, but as a member of society. He realized that change requires more than systemic reform. It starts with shifts in awareness and actions from each individual. In addition to the training, the police department introduced a new oversight system that allowed citizens to report misconduct transparently. This was a major step in rebuilding trust between the police and the community. These changes, though small, began to have a positive impact, and many hoped they would pave the way for a fairer, more transparent system. Rachel felt happy to see her efforts making a difference, although she knew there was still a long road ahead, filled with challenges. She believed in the power of community and unity. She understood that as long as they didn't give up, they could create real change. One day, Rachel received an invitation to attend a community gathering where those affected by abuse of power could share their stories. Upon arriving, she was surprised to see John there as well. This was the first time they had seen each other since their meeting at the law office. John approached Rachel proactively, greeting her. He told her that he had learned a great deal from everything that had happened, and he wanted to thank her for helping him realize his mistakes. Rachel looked at him, sensing the sincerity in his words. She smiled and said, "We all make mistakes. What's important is what we learn from them and how we go about making things right." During the gathering, many people shared heartbreaking stories of experiencing abuse of power and unfair treatment. John listened, feeling his heart tighten. He understood that what he had done wasn't just a personal mistake but part of a larger issue within the system. He decided to stand up and share his own story, what he had done and what he was striving to change. John's story left a powerful impression on everyone present. They saw his remorse and determination to change. Some people approached him afterward, shaking his hand and expressing support for his efforts. Rachel felt proud, seeing that even those who had once made mistakes could change and become better people. After continuous efforts, positive changes began to appear in the community. The relationship between the police and citizens gradually improved. Meetings and discussions between the police and the community were held more frequently, allowing both sides to understand each other better and build mutual trust. Rachel and John also continued to work together on various community projects. They became companions in the fight for justice and equality. John learned to listen and respect those he once looked down on. He realized that diversity is a strength and that everyone has value and unique contributions to offer society. Rachel, meanwhile, continued her work with optimism and determination. She knew that the fight against injustice was not a short-term battle but a long journey. But she was not alone. Beside her were friends, colleagues, and even people like John, individuals willing to stand up and fight for a better future. One afternoon, as Rachel and John attended an award ceremony honoring individuals who had made positive contributions to the community, they looked at each other and smiled. They both knew they had come a long way from those early days of tension and misunderstanding. Together, they had overcome barriers and prejudices, building a brighter future side by side. Rachel spoke at the ceremony. "We may come from different backgrounds and hold different perspectives, but we all share one common goal: justice and equality for all. I believe that as long as we stay united and keep pushing forward, we will create real change." Applause echoed throughout the hall, and in that moment, both Rachel and John felt an overwhelming sense of hope. They knew the road ahead would still hold many challenges, but with determination and patience, they believed they could overcome them all and build a fairer society for future generations. After achieving initial success in reforming and rebuilding trust between the police and the community, Rachel and John decided to expand their activities. They realized that it wasn't just the city where they lived that needed change, but many other communities, especially those in remote and forgotten areas, were also in need of fairness and support. Rachel and John, along with a group of volunteers, began organizing trips to small rural communities. They brought programs focused on human rights, diversity, and inclusion, and held discussions with local residents. For them, this was a way to extend the influence of the positive changes they had established and spread a spirit of solidarity to areas that lacked attention. Once, during a trip to a small village deep in the mountains, Rachel and John met Mrs. Mary, an elderly woman living with her granddaughter. Mrs. Mary shared with them the difficulties her family had faced, from discrimination to a lack of necessary assistance. John felt deeply saddened by her story. He realized that issues of abuse of power and injustice weren't only found in big cities but were prevalent everywhere, often even more severe in places with limited legal presence. John and the volunteers helped Mrs. Mary repair her dilapidated home and organized a community gathering to hear more about the issues people in the area were experiencing. Such encounters allowed John to gain a deeper understanding of his responsibility, and he became even more determined to contribute to improving the lives of local people, especially those who were most vulnerable. On another trip to a poor riverside community, Rachel and John's team faced a crisis. One night, they received word of a violent incident between two groups in the village, resulting in multiple injuries and a growing sense of unease within the community. John and Rachel decided to step in and find a way to ease the tension. Rachel, along with other team members, sat down with both sides to listen and understand the root of the conflict. She realized that the issue stemmed from mutual misunderstandings and suspicions between groups of different backgrounds within the village. Differences in culture and lifestyle had led to long-standing misunderstandings and conflicts. John took the initiative to organize a reconciliation meeting, where members of both groups could openly share their thoughts and feelings. He knew that resolving the issue required helping people listen to and understand each other. With Rachel's support, they created a safe space for open discussion without judgment or intimidation. The meeting lasted for hours, but eventually, tensions began to ease. People started to see that they were not as different as they once thought and that they all desired a peaceful, harmonious life. Rachel and John helped the community establish a local mediation group to resolve future conflicts, ensuring that everyone had a voice and felt respected. During a community discussion, John unexpectedly encountered a man named Marcus, whom he had unjustly arrested in the past. Marcus instantly recognized John's face and could not hide his anger upon seeing him. Rachel noticed the tension and decided to let John handle the situation, believing this was an opportunity for him to face his mistakes. John approached, his eyes full of remorse. He knew that what he had done to Marcus was inexcusable, and it was now time to take responsibility. John offered a sincere apology, explaining that he had recognized his mistakes and was working to change. He said, "I know that an apology can't erase the hurt I caused you, but I hope you can see the changes in me and give me a chance to make amends." Marcus remained silent for a long moment, his eyes still filled with resentment. But as he looked into John's genuine expression, he saw that the man before him was no longer the harsh officer from years ago. Marcus decided to forgive John, but he made it clear that the most important thing was for John to continue working to prevent similar injustices from happening to others. The conversation with Marcus was one of the most challenging yet essential experiences for John. It reminded him that change was not just about learning from others but also about facing his past and striving to correct the wrongs he had done. This was a vital step on his journey to becoming a better person. Rachel's efforts in reform and advocacy for equality had garnered the attention of government officials. One day, she received an invitation to meet with representatives from the state government, who were eager to hear her proposals on improving the judicial and police systems and to explore ways to collaborate on implementing these reforms on a larger scale. Rachel prepared thoroughly for the meeting, bringing along data, first-hand accounts from individuals affected by abuses of power, and concrete proposals to address these issues. During the meeting, she presented her points clearly and persuasively, emphasizing that change was not only necessary but also urgent to protect the rights of all citizens. The meeting concluded with significant agreement from the government officials, who pledged to support Rachel in implementing training programs for police officers and to consider legislative changes to ensure transparency and accountability in law enforcement. Rachel felt a renewed sense of hope, realizing that the efforts of her and the community were not in vain and that they had started to see the light of change. Rachel and John attended a celebration marking the success of the first reforms in the community. The ceremony took place at the Central Park, where hundreds of local residents gathered to share in the joy and express gratitude to those who stood up for justice. The smiles, embraces, and heartfelt words of thanks made Rachel and John feel that all their efforts had been truly worthwhile. John gave a short but heartfelt speech, sharing his journey from being a police officer with unconscious biases to becoming someone who genuinely listens and learns from the community. He said, "I once thought I understood justice, but it was only when I faced my mistakes and listened to your stories that I truly grasped the meaning of fairness and responsibility. I will continue to learn and dedicate myself to honoring the trust you've placed in me." Rachel also spoke, emphasizing the importance of unity and the power of the community. She thanked everyone for supporting her, for never losing faith in change, and for standing with her in the fight for a fairer society. Rachel acknowledged that there were still many challenges ahead but recognized that they had made a significant step forward and would continue on, for the future of everyone. After the ceremony, Rachel and John stood back, watching as people laughed and shared in the joy. They knew their journey was far from over, but what they had achieved that day was clear proof that change was possible as long as they persevered and held on to hope. They smiled, exchanging a look of mutual understanding and respect, and together they looked toward the future with determination and a strong belief in a more just world.